Hello students. Today we are going to study the political thought of Thomas Hobbes. Now Hobbes is an English philosopher of the 17th century and is uniquely positioned in the history of political thought, in the history of philosophical thought, as well as in the departments of culture, even in history, to offer us unique insights into society, history, and even cosmology and knowledge, epistemology. Now, the question is, why is Thomas Hobbes important? Thomas Hobbes is important because he is at the threshold of medieval political thought and modern political thought. But Thomas Hobbes is specially and uniquely positioned in this tradition because he is the meeting and the melting point of medieval political thinking and modern political thinking. To begin with, what is modern political thinking? Modern political thinking is marked by a separate sphere called the political. In medieval political thought, or even in classical political thought, say take Aristotle or Plato, you'll never find a separate sphere called the political. In Aristotle, for instance, in his Politics, which is classical political thought, you have the discussion of household, friendship, and virtues of friendship, all being collapsed under one rubric. It is politics, which is absolutely capable of accomplishing the good of the polis or the Greek community. Now, in the modern political thought, we do not have a whole approach in which friendship, virtue, and household is discussed in the same breath. Here, we have a separate sphere called the political. Now, Thomas Hobbes is important because in him, for the first time, we have the end of this kind of holistic discourse and the separation of the discourses of the political beginning. Now, modern political thinking, as I said, begins with a secular approach. For instance, church. Church in the medieval political thought is not a separate sphere. In modern political thinking, we don't consider church as a political association. Modern politics starts by demarcating church and relegating it to the realm of a kind of religious or the spiritual. In the sense, it is a different form of a civil association. We say religion and politics should be separate. But in medieval political thinking, religion and politics is never separate, right? In medieval political thinking, you have large chunks of theology and discussion of religion all going into the same discourse, right? Now in Hobbes, this is absolutely not the case. Modern political thinking starts by separating the secular and the political. In medieval political thinking, such separation is not possible. In medieval political thinking, even in classical political thinking, you can have every subject brought into the domain of that kind of discourse. So, modern political thinking is basically secular in nature. You cannot justify a particular form of governance or rule by appealing to divine authority or divine right. In medieval political thinking, this is very much possible. Now, Hobbes was a clear departure from this kind of discourse. And in this sense, he is a modern political thinker. Now, the question is, if modern political thinking is marked by the direct relevance of structures and functions tied to governance, then again Hobbes is of special relevance. Because in Hobbes, though he starts by appealing to a state of nature, he ends up in the realm of politics. But there were thinkers preceding him in which the state of nature, divine kingship, divine rule, divine authority, that was all and all of their discourses. Now, it was possible for Hobbes not only to explore these medieval registers of thinking but also to be critical of them. And that is the reason why Hobbes was often denounced in his own times as an atheist, as an anarcho-royalist, because he was an absolutist, the supporter of kingship. But at the same time, in his own discourse, Hobbes tried to chart out the regions or the grounds on which rebellion against absolute authority could be justified. For instance, when Hobbes is arguing for the absolute sovereignty of the king. Now, here we have to keep in mind the times in which Hobbes lived. It was a kind of country at that time, England, which was torn by civil wars. Now, this image of a civil war haunted Thomas Hobbes. And from this, the image of a country torn by civil war, Thomas Hobbes derived his famous metaphor that it is as if a state of nature in which there is a war going on of all against all, that everybody is fighting with everyone. So this image or the metaphor of the civil war haunts Thomas Hobbes. And he transfers this metaphor to the realm of nature. And he derives his political thought from that realm of nature. There is, of course, the question of divine right, divine authority. But as I said, Hobbes never ends with the regions with which he starts. And in this sense, Hobbes is impeccably and indisputably modern. Finally, to put an ending note to this introductory preface, you see, modern political thought is engaged with the state. In medieval or classical political traditions, you don't have anything called the state. Though there are theorists who have tried to argue that the state in some form could be found in medieval or ancient classical traditions. But those attempts have been weak. In Hobbes, especially, there is a special and significant reference and articulation of the state. In all these senses, then, Thomas Hobbes is very much a modern political thinker. And this is the reason why it is significant to undertake a study of Thomas Hobbes. Now, the question is, this argument, has this been endorsed by any political theorist of significance? Now, in future, I guess, you'll study somebody called Leo Strauss, a political philosopher. Leo Strauss is a specialist in Hobbes, and he endorses this view with much force and rigor. Now, having understood this, there are two additions to be made. One is, while I am presenting Hobbes and the important registers or modalities of his thinking, Hobbes cannot be exhausted by these registers. So I'll urge you to go for any student edition of the works of Thomas Hobbes. One is, of course, to study Leviathan in some form, which is Hobbes' classic. There are other classics also. Deceive is another classic which I'll urge you to study. Now, how did Thomas Hobbes start? And what are the registers of his thought? Thomas Hobbes started peculiarly, because in those days this was happening, with what human nature is like, and what kind of human nature is relevant or is responsible for a particular form of political conditioning and political authority. For Thomas Hobbes, men were selfish, brutish, and nasty. Opposite to this view is men are divine, men are very good. It was risky in Hobbes' own times to say this. It used to take a lot of courage to say this. Even to say this today would be to hazard a lot of risk. And we can derive this risk from the thought of Thomas Hobbes by speculating as to how Thomas Hobbes advanced from this point of starting with what human nature is. Then, in a state of nature, all are led by their own interests and what they think is right. Hobbes said, there is a war of all against all in the state of nature. What did he mean by this kind of war? As I said before, that the image of civil war was haunting Thomas Hobbes. And the war of everyone against everybody haunted Thomas Hobbes. In Hobbes' own language was, we must therefore resolve that the original of all great and lasting societies consisted not in the mutual goodwill men had towards each other, but in the mutual fear they had of each other. Just imagine this. We cannot trust the mutual goodwill, the better and productive company of each other, but the mutual fear of each other is what actually founds society. Now, the question of mutual fear, Thomas Hobbes said, are led by three registers. One is competition, second is diffidence, third is glory. Now, why competition? Competition for gain. For instance, there is, as we know today, the goods are scarce. I mean, if there is one tree or if there is one animal, it could be desired by, 5 men. So there is competition for gain and there is destruction. There is diffidence. This competition could be, understood in terms of our hankering for safety. We want to be safe and we don't want to be killed. There is always a fear of violent death in Hobbes. I mean, in today's language, this would be murder. We always are scared of the prospect of violent death. We don't want to be killed. We don't want to be murdered. But if you say, that is there a possibility that you could kill or you could murder? Men will be silent. Men would be silent. But we all know that there is a possibility that men will kill even if they would not like to be killed. The third register for this war is glory, which means reputation or fame. These three registers, competition, diffidence and glory, unless mutually settled, leads first to insecurity and then to war. Now, what is the way? This was Hobbes' first hunch. If the state of nature leads to or unleashes a war of all men against everybody, then what is the way? Hobbes argued that the solution, the answers are there in nature too. There are laws in nature by which we could resolve these differences. And what is that? Hobbes argued that everybody has his own region. Now, when we try to, destroy others and get hold of a particular good, we are led by our own region. And it is sometimes, in a state of nature, it is absolutely right to do so. We are led by our own region to do so. Though, my own objection would be to theorize in this way a state of nature, which somebody has said a bestial ethics, is somewhat misleading. Because as today we say Jungle Raj, to refer to a lawless state of things, Hobbes' contention to define the state of nature is somewhat misleading. Because even if the image of animals, as it haunted Hobbes, is not correct. Because if you see animals in a jungle, they're not always fighting with each other. They're not always killing each other. There is friendship, love, familial orientation, a kind of group, collective life among animals. Friendship, societas, everything is found among animals. So to conceive the state of nature in terms of animals, and the animals always, they are killing each other, is absolutely misleading and wrong. So this bestial ethic, in terms of today's, animal ethics or practical ethical theorists, they will point out this is wrong. Man, in fact, as Hobbes rightly said, is the most nasty and dangerous kind of animal. This is only possible in the case of men and not with animals. However, to resume the point that we were discussing. See, everybody is sort of armed with his or her own reason and trying to grab things and destroying others while trying to preserve one's own self. This self-preservation, according to Hobbes, is very important. And this reason by which the self is preserved can be had from nature itself. Self-preservation then is the point by which Hobbes departs from the state of nature. The point is, self-preservation has, anything by which others are destroyed. There is war among us, right? Or I destroy myself is not rational, is not reasonable enough, right? Reasonable enough would be where all are in a state of peace, where all are secured. There is no fight, right? And there is no destruction. There is self-preservation. Now, Hobbes is arguing that where the rule of reason can be had from nature, where the self can be preserved, importantly, and of course necessarily, then how to accomplish this? According to Hobbes, this can be accomplished by a contract. What is this contract? Contract is where some peoples come together and settle that it is necessary to transfer a part of our claim, to relinquish a part of our claim, to transfer it to somebody by which we can all be secured. Say, for instance, if we are playing football, there is one football, one ball, but there are so many, say 22 people are running after one ball. So the point we come together and frame the rules of playing football. I shall go for the ball, but if somebody else also comes, I cannot, I cannot stab him. I cannot give him a kick and throw him away because I'm stronger. No, not at all. If he takes the ball away from me, I'll try to grab it from him in a very regular, very legal manner, right? So this image, this picture, this association, this instance is what is called the instance of a contract. Now, what is Hobbes saying? Hobbes is saying some rights have to be transferred. Some rights have to be relinquished. Let us then come together and let us decide on a leader. Our leader is the common power. We all have some powers, but there is no common power in the state of nature. The common power is our ruler. We transfer our rights and submit it to our ruler, that please protect us, give us security, frame rules, and in return, we shall obey your rule. We shall obey your rule. Now, this is, during Hobbes' times, this was devastating, revolutionary, because at that time, even following from the medieval political thought, there is to be the invocation of, the divine right of kings. By invoking God, I am ruling you. But here, Hobbes is arguing, you are ruling us because we have allowed you to rule, and transfer some of our rights to a common power. This common power is the sovereign, and the sovereign will rule us, but we rule us by our consent. So today when we say that governance or government will be by force of consent, by the force of people's consent, this may be said has had its origins in Thomas Hobbes, right? Now, it has been said by many theorists on Hobbes and theorists of the political tradition that while medieval political thinking tried to appeal to divine right, divine law, to justify particular form of kingship or authority, what Hobbes is doing, he is establishing natural law. He is deriving his force from natural law. So as if political authority for the first time is being based on solid natural foundations, naturalistic foundations, right? So in this sense, Hobbes is of utmost importance, because the tradition of natural law in political thinking, as you'll know later, is very, very important. For instance, today's human rights appeals to natural law tradition to be meaningful. We have a human right not to be killed, right? Now, this human right derives from what? This human right derives from the power of naturally, because we are naturally human. Unless you are a human being, you cannot claim human rights. Though there are arguments that human rights are not for everybody, even animals could be, granted human rights to live. Well, but that's a different topic altogether. But when we claim human rights as being naturally human, we are appealing to a particular natural trait. Our natural, the way we are naturally born as a particular form of a species, our species being. So this is the natural law tradition from which human rights today derives its force. And the natural law tradition has been illuminatingly put into force by Thomas Hobbes. Now, why should then, after all this discussion, it's necessary to consider, Hobbes's most important point as to why should we obey an authority who is above us. We should obey authority because the authority, we have granted him the authority to rule us. He will give us security and we shall be obedient. Now the second point is, suppose if a ruler, by virtue of this contract, misrules us, we are governed very badly, we are tortured, we are killed, there is no security to our persons, or some will say to our property, then what shall be done? As I said in the beginning, it was in Hobbes that a certain form of right to resistance could be derived. Hobbes argues, by virtue of this instrument called the contract, we might just say that you have broken the contract. We can say it to the ruler, that you have broken the contract, you're not giving us safety, you're not protecting us, we are not secured, our persons, our property, and everything, our cultural subsistence, our mind, our temperament to think productively, everything has been tampered with. So, you have broken the point is this, it is not the people who are breaking the contract and unleashing revolution or resistance. The argument is the ruler has broken the contract. If that is so, then this contract has to be revoked. And from this, it has been argued that Hobbes was trying to justify the right of resistance or rebellion. So, having come up to this point, now we may wrap up our first lecture by pointing out what Hobbes aimed at and how would he sort of proceed in future. As we said, the point of departure for Hobbes was nature. In nature, everything was allowed, everything was permissible, and so everything was possible. But led by the rule of reason for self-preservation, which is available in nature also, from this nature's region, deriving this nature's region, we come together and then transfer some of our right, bring up a common power, delegate him the power to rule over us, give us security, and promise obedience to this common will or common power. This is where Hobbes ends and ends up in a revolutionary manner, because this is going to have future implications and will inspire a number of upsurges, rebellions in human history. So Thomas Hobbes is a thinker of dangerous potential.